So the hero's journey is essentially a plot that is usually taken by a main protagonist who you want the audience to root for, and it's a typical path that goes from one point to another, coming back to a similar point. And that is the journey that people love with. Let me explain this properly. So this chart you see over here, that is the hero's journey chart. We start at the very top. Notice how this whole circle is cut in two parts, right? The first half is the normal world and the lower half is the unknown world, or like the sort of special world. So we start with the normal world at the very top. It's called the start, right? And from there, the first thing that happens to our character is that he gets a call to an adventure, like an invitation. Something is happening. And so he's like, oh, something is happening, but I can't do it. I have some money problems. I can't do it because it is very difficult. So the first thing that happens after the call to adventure is that they usually refuse the call. The call is not taken. But there comes a mentor. The character meets a mentor, and the mentor says, Nahi balak, you have it in you. Go for it. You got it. And so inspired by the mentor, the hero decides, okay, I will do it. And that is when, once a decision is made, the story's underworld begins. It's really where the action starts. So what exactly happens? The hero crosses the threshold, okay? He starts the adventure. So trials and tribulations come, all the different challenges start coming. And around this time, the hero gets a helper archetype. It could be like a animal, a friend, or something who accompanies the hero on this journey. And so as he's facing these trials and tribulations and growths, he faces something very critical. And this is like the climax of the story, like the most intense part where the hero is struggling. And this is where he literally takes a rebirth. It's like something fundamentally changes in the hero because of all these trials and tribulations. And then something is revealed to him as a reward, like this is the gift that he gets to learn from all this conflict. And then he takes that gift, and with him he comes back. But along the way, he obviously atones, he looks back, he sees like all the things that he did. Maybe he did something wrong, or like he hurt someone, then he like does all the fixes, so that we see like the kind side of the hero. And then he sort of comes back to the real world, and then the story ends, curtains drop. So this archetypical story that I told you, you can find the versions of it everywhere. And the same story, we saw it in the sequence of a circle. You could also interpret it in the story path sort of a visualization. The guy starts at like a normal thing, then a call to adventure, something exciting, but then they refuse that call because of some other things. But then the mentor comes, he says like, no, you can do it. So the guy decides to, okay, I will do it. Then the extraordinary world, and then all the trials, tribulations, all of that begins. Then like it reaches the lowest point where like the biggest sacrifice or something happens, and then from that the hero usually wins. He gets the reward and he returns back to the ordinary world. So you can interpret it like this. You can see there is elements of the boy meets girl over here. Then there is this whole big dramatic way of a man in a hole, from the adventure to something bad happens, then reward, and then coming down. So a hero's journey is essentially a complex man in a hole story, okay? And it's not really a circle, it's more like a helix, kind of how life is, right? Like we go back to that same state, but every time we complete that parikrama, we have moved ahead in life, we have gone somewhere. So life in many ways is a sequence of hero's journey. You take something and you take something and you take something. Like in college I used to feel like, oh, I have to do all of this, I have to get into IIT, I have to do it. And then as soon as I went into IIT, I'm like, oh my god, I start from level 1 again. I have to now go all these 5 years. I have to get internships. I have to get all of this. And once you're out of college, you're like, oh my god, now I have to start as a job. Now I'm a fresher. And then it's sequence again and again and again. So I guess the reason Hero Circle appeals so much to us, because that is how a phase in our life feels like. We start from somewhere, we go through all these challenges, but we evolve after the end of each sort of iteration, and then we move up like a helix. This is an example here of how Harry Potter essentially follows the hero's journey. I'll be very quick. Harry is living with the Dursleys, and then he gets the Hogwarts letter, but Dursley does not allow him, so refusal of the call. But then comes Hagrid, who's the mentor, who says Harry, you're a wizard. And then he invites him to cross the threshold, literally through platform 9, 3x4, and they cross it, they go into the walls of Hogwarts. There's all this Quidditch. Malfoy is being he's bullying Harry, he's making all these friends. Then he gets to know about Voldemort. That's where all his trials and tribulations happens. And then they go into the Forbidden Forest, in the Sorcerer's Stone. Essentially the trio sort of goes, they meet the three-headed dog or whatever, and they finally are able to prevent Voldemort from getting the Sorcerer's Stone. But that was the reward. But while they're coming back, they realize that Hogwarts is still not safe from Voldemort. Voldemort can still return back. So in any way, they come back, and then Harry goes back to Dursley's home. But this time he's not as helpless, he's not as weak as he was when he started first. So that's the hero's journey for the Harry Potter cycle. From the world of full-fledged stories, let's go a little closer to the world of data storytelling and think of how the news people do it, right? For the longest time, the storytellers, the data storytellers, were journalists. So they present a story in this way. There's a heading, right? The heading which gives us the main chunk of what is happening. So that's sort of like a call to adventure, right? That's a come know my story. So that's the adventure. And then there's a lead. The lead is essentially the most important part of a story that captures the key takeaways. So it's everything that you'll read after the headline. So that's where you're entering the territory of the special world. Then comes the nut graph. The nut graph is where you are getting all the meat of the story. It is setting the context of the story. It sets the direction of the story, what happened, what led to what. And then you have all the trials and tribulations of this world, the copy essentially. And finally the return, you could interpret it as the kicker, or the conclusive part of the story, what is the takeaway from this article. So you see, the hero's journey in a way also transcends to the way you talk about a journalism story. So the call to adventure is the hook, then the refusal is the opposition or the conflict, but then a mentor could be what the experts are saying, what is something that all the people are agreeing with. Then the crossing of the threshold is where you are talking about all the major chunk of what is curious about this case, what exactly led to this. Then you present a sequence of supporting data, you give some brief prehistory. Obviously all of this gets called as the body of the story. And then we reach at the central issue, the main issue of what was this whole story about. Then we get an insight, which is the reward from all of this conflict that we went through. Then from that we come to the implications, the big picture, and finally the insight or the takeaway that the user can take it with. So a story in today's world, a journalism story, also follows the hero cycle in some ways. And Making it simpler more in the social media version, you can translate it all to a hook, which is like the call to action, what grabs your attention, which says like, hey, pay attention, like come on a journey with me. Then we talk about the what exactly happened. And then the most important thing, you're setting the context, you've gotten their attention, you have given like the what of it, but then there has to be a conflict, there has to be a twist in the beach, which essentially every story needs to have that, right? So there's the but. And then what do we learn from that conflict? So what happens? So you get that, and then the final takeaway. So you can see this as a simple form of like a 3-part act. So it's a hook, you grab their attention, you give them a conflict, and you then show them how would they process that conflict, how would they take away from that conflict. Let's watch a story made by Google like 14 years ago. And the reason I'm showing you the story is because it does not look like a story. Okay, it's not a film. It's an ad essentially, and yet it has all the elements of a story, and which is why it has like millions of views on YouTube. Let's take a watch. Beautiful, isn't it? So that is data storytelling. At no point did we even know about those characters, but they took us on a journey of their life, from this guy going to Paris for an internship to finding the love of his life, and through his searches, through looking for like church or looking for like this crib or long distance, we are getting to know what is he going through. Data storytelling is basically that. It's presenting things, evidence, which are independent, right? They are facts, they are not opinions, but the way they connect, the way they paint a picture in someone's mind, that is very imaginative, that is not dry. So data storytelling in a way is so beautiful because you give people just facts which appeals and convinces their mind, their brain, which is why they trust it. But because you have so nicely arranged them, or you have presented those data points in such a beautiful manner, that it also tickles their heart in the process, and it starts with a tickle and it translates into a big laughter, and then it becomes like an insight. So it's the art of arranging facts in a story by knowing what exactly a story is shaped like. When do we say what? How do we sort of create and weave these facts that it feels like a warm blanket to someone? That is exactly data storytelling that I want you to learn from this course. After saying all of that, all the stories, characters and all of this, I want to leave you with this reel that I found really interesting. It goes by like how to be socially magnetic, but I think there's a message that comes, which I think we should discuss. Let's take a look.
When you feel good about yourself, you could talk about literally anything. I could talk about the floor and people would be interested. The fact that even right here, you can begin, but there is this huge scratch mark, right? You see it? And it kind of trails off here. Now, I asked the guy before, like, well, what created this scratch mark? Why are you still listening? Let that land. Why are you listening to me talk about the floor? It's not about what I say. I call these the 4 layers of communication. At the surface, there's what you say. And that's what usually people are obsessed with. If I want to be interesting talking to someone, it's in what I say. It's not that important. Layer number 2 is how you say it. Now that's much more important than what you say. How you say it, the tonality. Is it going up at the end or down? Third layer is your intention behind it. And this is sub-communicated. And the 4th layer is your overall level of self-esteem, how you feel about yourself. The deeper you go, the more powerful.
So you should keep in mind that, how people feel about you, how people take your stories, it is not just limited to what that story is, or how you're telling the stories, what kind of emotions and everything, but it also depends on what your intent is. Like if you are telling a story to manipulate others, no matter how effective it is, people have a way of sensing it. And in that case, you can use the best storytelling techniques, but you will break trust of people, right? Like maybe not on the first go, but eventually they will not be drawn to your storytelling skills. And as this guy said, at this like fundamental level, at its core level, a story is also a reflection of how you feel about yourself. So if you don't feel super nice about yourself, it will come across the story. When you're presenting that story, it will leak somehow. It's a little magical, it's a little woo-woo, but it somehow happens that way. And maybe one reason we enjoyed our grandma's stories so much, even if like there are multiple versions of that stories told even in nicer, fancy ways on YouTube and everything, is because we weren't really listening to the story, but we were enjoying the love of our grandmothers. It was their love that we were drawn to, not the story. The story was just a message. So let's summarize everything we learned today and yesterday. How do you take away all of the knowledge and apply it in your life? Remember, first, stories are a play of tension and release. This is a principle you can apply in every form of storytelling, not just audio storytelling, data storytelling, but even in dance, in music, in songs. Everything is one where you intensify and then you release. The man in a hole is essentially starting from a high, chill, comfortable point and then building up tension and then eventually releasing it. So it's this universal tension and release. It's this universal sukh and dukh ka play that feels very human to us and which we want to see in our story. The second is story should show us the contrast of life. Life can be very motherly, but it can also be very, very cruel. Life can be very sweet, but life can also be very dark. Life can be filled with excitement. Life can be filled with drudgery and misery. One reason I think the Indians from 1967 worked was because we were doing all of this, with everything. There was one which was really serious. We started with Naina Puranik ji, right? And we ended on a little sad note of how she wasn't able to accomplish her dreams in her life. But then we go at a little higher point with Dunu Roy ji talking about how did he, stand up for the people. How did he sort of, transform all his interests and languages and all of this into something actionable that we can root in for. So that made us go from a hopelessness to a hopefulness. Then suddenly we talk about like this fleeting moment of like this one guy who had no mention in the story and we don't even know much about him. Like, is he dead or alive? We just know like something, which shows like, okay, like, yeah, what do we make sense of it? The third one we know about, the Foreign Blades guy who sadly is no longer with us, which reminds us like, death is a reality. People get forgotten. We don't even, we can't even bank on life always being there. And then there's a sense of humor that comes with like Mr. Victor Meneses, right? Like the contrast of like how carefree he was. Oh, I want to marry my boss's daughter. He's saying that. that there was a comic element to it, but then like it was suddenly so unexpected. He's like so successful and he's wowing us, and so it's that element there. And then we go to Sailesh Gandhiji, who is like very biting, very serious, and like, you know, his thing about being disappointed with India is like it solemns us. And then finally the hero of the story, T.N. Subramanian, who had enthralled us, who had captured our imagination in the first go. And then we see this direct contrast, right? And the later half of that video is all about me trying to make sense of this, my experience of it, trying to see like where India was, how India is going, and then asking this question to you guys. So I think that is what makes storytelling interesting. These universal feelings of tension and release, these contrasts of humor, of seriousness, of tension, when you put all of them in the right proportion, that is when you get the right story. And stories must evoke universal emotions in us, emotions that everyone feels, you know, melancholy, complex emotions. Don't just go for like happiness or sorrow, go for complex emotions which everyone feels but no one sees on the screen. So the more you can tickle those emotions, the more you will be able to connect with people. And then stories must follow the 3-act structure. Obviously, like must is a hard word, but generally it works for everyone. So build up, show a conflict, and then resolve it. That's like the DNA of every story, so it's helpful if we follow it. And then one more principle which we'll be seeing more in coming classes is that show, don't tell. You don't have to be literal about the story, you have to show people things. So rather than, for example, me saying that, oh, people in this part of the country have more of rice and in the northwest part have more of wheat, you just show it to people and let them connect the dots. Don't spoon feed your audience all the time. That makes people feel the sense of accomplishment, like, oh, we could figure it out, and it does not feel patronizing to just like narrate everything. And finally, which is I think my personal favorite from all of this class, is the intent of the story must be for the good of humanity. We can use stories for very manipulative purposes. We can use stories to hook people, to sell things to people and all of it, but somehow, it's just my blind faith, is that the intention leaks through the story and people can sense why you're telling the story. And so have that pure, and even if you don't tell the story nicely, people will connect with that emotion.